Picture yourself stepping into the Roman Colosseum 2,000 years ago. The air buzzes with the energy of 50,000 voices. The scent of spices and sweat hangs heavy, and sunlight glints off marble surfaces. Yet amid this seeming chaos, something remarkable happens. You find your seat effortlessly. The crowd flows around you like water around stones, and even from the highest tier, you feel connected to the action below. This sense of order wasn't achieved through force or fear. It was engineered through something far more powerful: hidden geometry. Ancient architects possessed a profound understanding of how shapes, angles, and curves could guide human behavior instinctively, creating environments where people moved harmoniously without realizing they were being directed. These stadiums weren't just monuments of stone. They were psychological instruments crafted with mathematical precision. What if I told you that the gentle curve of a pathway, the specific slope of seating, or the elliptical shape of an arena could determine whether a crowd remains calm or descends into chaos? For centuries, we've marveled at these ancient structures for their scale and beauty, but we've largely missed their greatest innovation. They were designed to think for us. Long before behavioral psychology became a formal science, architects were using geometry as a silent language that spoke directly to our subconscious, telling us where to walk, where to look, and how to interact with thousands of strangers. This hidden science transformed potentially volatile gatherings into smoothly orchestrated events where people felt naturally inclined to cooperate, remain engaged, and move safely, all without a single guard issuing commands. Today, we're embarking on a journey to uncover these ancient secrets and understand how they still influence the spaces we inhabit. We'll explore how the perfect ellipse of the Colosseum created ideal sightlines, how Greek theaters used semicircular designs to amplify whispers across thousands of spectators, and how calculated slopes prevented bottlenecks centuries before modern crowd management studies. This isn't just about history or architecture, it's about the fascinating intersection of mathematics, psychology, and human behavior. You'll discover principles that explain why certain spaces feel intuitively right while others create tension, and how these ancient innovations continue to shape everything from modern sports arenas to concert halls. Join me as we decode the geometric language that turned stone and mortar into masters of crowd psychology, and discover how these ancient techniques might help us design better, more harmonious spaces for tomorrow. To truly grasp the brilliance of ancient stadium design, we must travel back to a time when architecture was an extension of human instinct rather than a formal science. Picture the earliest civilizations, the Greeks, the Romans, the Mayans, facing a universal challenge. How do you gather thousands of people for a festival, a speech, or a sporting event without descending into chaos? There were no police barricades, no digital ticketing systems, no loudspeakers issuing commands. Order had to emerge from the very stones beneath their feet. These ancient builders possessed a profound, almost innate understanding that the shape of a space directly influences how people feel and behave within it. They observed the world around them with remarkable clarity, noticing how rivers flow in smooth curves around obstacles, how flocks of birds move in coordinated patterns without collision, and how natural amphitheaters formed by hillsides allowed sound to travel clearly. They began to mimic these organic patterns in their constructions, intuitively applying principles that would much later be defined as architectural psychology. This was not about creating grand monuments for show. It was a practical, deliberate solution to a social problem. By designing spaces that felt naturally easy to navigate, they reduced the friction and frustration that so often leads to conflict in crowded places. A gently curving pathway, for instance, doesn't just look beautiful, it slows people down subtly, prevents dangerous bottlenecks, and encourages a more relaxed, flowing movement. The specific gradient of seating wasn't just for a better view. It created a sense of visual equity, ensuring no one felt cheated or disadvantaged, which in turn fostered a collective contentment that kept the crowd calm and engaged. This early fusion of observation, mathematics, and social understanding laid the foundational blueprint for every major public space that followed. It proved that the most effective form of control isn't force, but foresight, designing an environment so intuitively aligned with human nature that people guide themselves. This invisible hand of geometry began its work millennia ago, quietly shaping societies from the ground up. At the heart of this architectural psychology lay a deep and purposeful application of mathematical principles. Ancient builders weren't just stacking stones, they were implementing a sophisticated geometric language, one that spoke directly to our innate sense of harmony and order. The circle was perhaps the most fundamental shape in their toolkit. More than just a simple curve, it represented unity and equality. In a circular arrangement, every point on the perimeter is equidistant from the center, creating a shared experience that made every spectator feel equally important to the event. This shape fostered a sense of community and collective engagement, reducing the feelings of isolation or disadvantage that can lead to restlessness in a crowd. But the true genius emerged when they moved beyond the perfect circle to the ellipse. This oval shape, with its two focal points, created a dynamic viewing experience. It allowed architects to design stadiums where the action wasn't just centered but was framed from multiple angles, ensuring that even those seated at the ends had an excellent, focused view rather than a distorted perspective. This careful manipulation of sightlines meant people weren't constantly straining or shifting to see, a primary source of frustration and physical agitation in any large gathering. Their understanding extended into the very specific with the application of the golden ratio, a mathematical constant found throughout nature, from the spiral of a nautilus shell to the arrangement of leaves on a stem. This ratio, approximately 1.618 to 1, was intricately woven into their designs. The width of an entrance might relate to its height by this ratio, creating a doorway that felt naturally proportionate and inviting, encouraging a smooth, unrushed flow of people. The spacing between rows of seats or the angle of a staircase would often follow this same divine proportion, resulting in pathways and seating that felt instinctively right to navigate, reducing subconscious stress and the potential for confusion. Even the slope of the steps was a product of precise calculation. Using principles attributed to Pythagoras, they determined the ideal rise and run for each step, the vertical height and the horizontal depth. This wasn't just about making climbing easier, it was a critical crowd management tool. A step too steep causes fatigue and slows movement, creating dangerous bottlenecks. A step too shallow feels inefficient and can lead to tripping or an awkward, shuffling gait. By calculating the perfect gradient, they ensured a steady, rhythmic flow of foot traffic, both ascending and descending, which prevented pile-ups and maintained a calm, orderly pace. Every one of these mathematical decisions was intentional. They were tapping into a universal human preference for balance, symmetry, and proportion principles that make an environment feel safe, comfortable, and intuitively comprehensible. This geometric blueprint transformed potentially oppressive and chaotic spaces into ones that felt inherently right, guiding behavior through subconscious comfort rather than overt control. No structure better exemplifies this marriage of mathematics and human movement than the Roman Colosseum. Its iconic elliptical form is far more than an aesthetic choice. It is a masterclass in geometric crowd psychology. While a perfect circle creates a single, central focal point, the ellipse, with its two distinct foci, generates multiple zones of optimal viewing. This subtle shift meant that no matter where you were seated, even in the very highest tier, the summa caveat, your sightlines converged naturally on the action in the arena, making you feel directly involved rather than a distant observer. This sense of connection was crucial. A spectator who feels engaged is a spectator who remains calmly in their seat, eliminating the restless shifting and obstructed views that so often spark frustration and disorder in large crowds. This genius extended far beyond the seating. The Colosseum's 80 archways were not placed randomly. They formed a symmetrical grid of entrances and exits, each numbered and corresponding to specific seating sections. This brilliant system acted like a prehistoric algorithm, pre-sorting the crowd and guiding 50,000 people along predetermined, non-intersecting paths. You entered through your designated arch, climbed a specific staircase, and emerged directly at your seat, a process so efficient it could empty the entire structure in a matter of minutes. The famed Vomitoria, whose name comes from the Latin voma, meaning to spew forth, were the engines of this system. These were not places for illness, as a common myth suggests, but rather brilliantly angled passageways that used converging walls to naturally accelerate the flow of people out of the building, preventing dangerous logjams at the doors. Every slope and angle was a calculated decision. The steepness of the seating bowl was precisely calibrated so each row rose just enough to see over the heads of those in front, creating a cascade of unobstructed views. The stairways were designed with a specific rise and run to facilitate a steady, rhythmic pace, whether ascending or descending. The result was an environment where movement felt effortless and intuitive. There was no need for guards to shout directions or for crowds to push and shove. The architecture itself did the work, guiding human behavior with a silent, geometric authority. The Colosseum stands as a timeless testament to a profound truth, that the most powerful form of control is not a show of force, but a show of foresight, engineered into the very stone. While the Romans perfected the ellipse for managing movement, the Greeks achieved something equally profound with the semicircle, mastering both the physics of sound and the complexities of social dynamics. The theater of Epidorus, carved into a Peloponnesian hillside over 2,000 years ago, remains an acoustic marvel where a coin dropped in the central orchestra can be heard perfectly in the back row, nearly 60 meters away. This wasn't a happy accident, it was a geometric triumph. The semicircular shape, known as the koilon, functioned as a massive natural amplifier. Sound waves from the stage would travel outward and upward, striking the stepped rows of limestone seats. Instead of being absorbed, these waves were reflected and focused back toward the audience, each row acting like a filter that dampened low-frequency crowd noise while enhancing the high-frequency clarity of the actors' voices. This acoustic perfection meant that a playwright's carefully crafted dialogue could be heard by all 14,000 spectators without a single shout for quiet. The architecture itself enforced auditory order, making the crowd an active, engaged participant in the performance rather than a disruptive force that needed to be controlled. Beyond managing sound, the geometry of these spaces also managed society itself. The seating was meticulously divided into wedge-shaped sections called kerchides, separated by staircases that radiated out from the orchestra like slices of a pie. Each kerchies was designated for a specific segment of society: priests, government officials, wealthy citizens, and commoners, creating a clear but unspoken social map. This clever design achieved a delicate balance. It maintained the hierarchical structure so important to ancient Greek society, but it did so without the need for visible barriers or armed guards that might incite class resentment. Everyone could see everyone else, fostering a sense of communal participation in a shared civic event, yet each group remained in its designated place. This subtle stratification reduced the potential for friction. By providing a clear and organized structure for where people belonged, the architecture eliminated the confusion, jostling, and territorial disputes that often occur in unstructured crowds. It used geometry to acknowledge social hierarchy while simultaneously using the same geometry to unite everyone under the common purpose of the performance. At the heart of this entire experience lay the orchestra, a perfectly circular, flat performance space that served as the undeniable focal point. This circle was the geometric anchor of the entire complex, the still point around which all sight lines and sound waves revolved. Its shape created a powerful psychological effect, drawing the collective gaze of the audience inward and fostering a shared, immersive experience. Every single person, regardless of their social standing in their respective kirkis, was focused on the same central action. This shared attention was a powerful unifying force, creating a temporary equality through collective engagement. The geometry of the Greek theater thus worked on multiple levels simultaneously. It ensured everyone could hear, it organized society without conflict, and it focused diverse individuals into a single, captivated community. It proves that ancient architects understood that controlling a crowd wasn't just about moving bodies, it was about harmonizing sounds, managing social expectations, and unifying attention through the silent, persuasive power of shape. If you've ever been stuck in a long, straight corridor with a crowd, you know the feeling of impatience that sets in. You can see the entire distance you have to cover. The end seems to barely get closer, and the sheer monotony can make people irritable and more likely to push forward. Ancient architects understood this human tendency on an intuitive level. Their brilliant counter-intuition was that the most efficient way to move a mass of people is rarely a straight line. Instead, they masterfully employed curves, arcs, and gentle bends in their pathways, ramps, and exits. A perfect example is the Circus Maximus in Rome, a massive chariot racing stadium that could hold over 150,000 spectators. Its lengthy track was defined by sweeping curves at either end, but the genius extended into the spectator areas. The access ramps and vomitoria leading into the seating were designed as curved tunnels. This curvature served a critical psychological purpose. It eliminated long, daunting sightlines. You couldn't see the entire congested path ahead, only the next short section, which created a sense of progression and momentum. This visual trick prevented the feeling of being trapped in an endless, unmoving queue, a primary trigger for crowd anxiety and panic. The geometry of these curves was not arbitrary. Architects calculated the radius of each turn based on the expected flow and density of the crowd. A turn that was too tight would create a choke point where people would inevitably bunch up and stumble. A turn that was too wide would fail to provide any meaningful guidance, rendering it ineffective. They found a mathematical sweet spot, a gradual, generous curve that naturally and imperceptibly moderated the crowd's pace. This gentle bend acted as a natural speed regulator. It caused people to slow down slightly as they navigated the turn, not because of a command or a barrier, but simply due to the innate caution we exercise when a path changes direction. This subtle deceleration was enough to prevent the dangerous domino effect that occurs when a fast-moving crowd from behind crashes into a suddenly stopped or slowed group ahead. By avoiding these abrupt stops, the curved pathways eliminated the primary cause of pile-ups and crushing force. This ancient wisdom is now rigorously confirmed by modern pedestrian dynamics and urban planning studies. Contemporary research into crowd movement consistently shows that curved pathways significantly reduce the number of collisions compared to straight ones packed with people. The reason is fascinatingly simple. In a straight corridor, everyone is looking ahead toward the same distant point, their peripheral vision limited. In a curved pathway, however, people are forced to constantly adjust their trajectory. This makes individuals more aware of their immediate surroundings, causing them to instinctively glance around, make micro-adjustments to their path, and subconsciously cooperate with the flow of those around them. The curved environment fosters a more distributed and attentive field of vision among the entire crowd, leading to a collective, self-organizing order. The ancient builders, through observation and iteration, arrived at this same principle millennia ago. They crafted routes that felt surprisingly spacious and easy to navigate even when they were at maximum capacity, because the curves broke the crowd into more manageable, flowing segments rather than a single, overwhelming mass. This stands as a timeless lesson in leadership and design. Gentle, empathetic guidance that works with human nature is infinitely more effective and humane than rigid, forceful control that works against it. This architectural innovation truly changed the game for large gatherings. Before tiered seating, imagine the frustration of being in a flat arena, constantly craning your neck, standing on your toes, or trying to peer over the shoulders of those in front of you. This relentless struggle for a glimpse of the action created a chaotic and physically aggressive environment where shoving and jostling were inevitable. The simple yet profound act of elevating each successive row of seats addressed this fundamental human desire to see and participate. It transformed the spectator experience from a competitive struggle into a shared, communal enjoyment. But the ancient engineers didn't just build steps, they applied precise mathematical principles to achieve the perfect balance between visibility, safety, and comfort. They understood that the slope couldn't be a simple, uniform incline. If the angle was too steep for the entire structure, those in the highest seats would feel terrifyingly isolated and exposed, a sensation akin to vertigo that would make them feel insecure and disconnected from the event below. Conversely, if the slope was too shallow, the entire purpose was defeated, as people in the back would still have their views obstructed. Their solution was a masterpiece of geometric progression. They employed a calculated formula where the vertical rise for each row was not a fixed number, but one that increased by a specific ratio. In magnificent structures like Athens' Panathenaic Stadium, built entirely of Pentelic marble, this principle was executed flawlessly. The incline begins quite steeply at the track level. This ensured that the first dozen rows or so, which were often the most prized and expensive seats, had an incredibly immediate and intimate view, rising sharply to see over the athletes and officials on the ground. Then, as the seating ascends, the rate of increase gradually lessens. The slope becomes slightly more gentle with each tier. This brilliant design served two critical functions. First, it optimized the sightlines from every single position. The steep lower section quickly elevated spectators above the ground level activity, while the gradually flattening upper section meant that the overall height of the stadium didn't become astronomically and dangerously tall to achieve those same clear views for the back rows. Second, it maintained the structural integrity of the building. A massive, uniformly steep concrete or stone bowl exerts tremendous downward and outward pressure. By varying the angle, the weight distribution was managed more efficiently, creating a stable and enduring form. The psychological impact of this design cannot be overstated. It cultivated a powerful sense of visual equity. Whether you were a wealthy citizen in the front or a common laborer in the very last row, you were guaranteed an unobstructed view of the games. This perception of fairness was crucial for crowd morale. When people feel they are being treated fairly and have equal access to the experience, they are far more likely to remain content, patient, and civil. The incessant urge to push forward, to climb over others, or to constantly shift position simply vanished. The architecture itself preemptively solved the primary source of friction. Everyone could settle in, relax, and become fully immersed in the spectacle, their physical comfort allowing for mental and emotional engagement. This carefully calculated slope did more than just provide a better view. It engineered a collective state of calm satisfaction, proving that the most effective crowd control is often the kind that gives everyone an equal stake in the event. This powerful sense of enclosure created by circular and oval designs taps into something primal within us. We are not creatures who naturally thrive in vast, undefined open spaces. We are drawn to places that offer a sense of boundary and belonging. Think of a campfire where people instinctively form a circle. The firelight defines the space, creating a pocket of warmth and safety against the immense darkness beyond. An ancient stadium masterfully recreated this feeling on a monumental scale. The continuous, unbroken curve of the walls and seating sections acted like a giant embrace, holding the community within it. This physical boundary created a powerful psychological container, transforming a random collection of thousands of individuals into a single, cohesive audience with a shared purpose. The architecture itself fostered an in-group mentality, where people felt connected to those around them simply by virtue of being inside the same defined space. This dramatically lowered the anxiety that can come with being in a massive, faceless crowd. When you feel like you are part of a collective, your behavior shifts to align with the group. You become more likely to cooperate, to follow the unspoken rhythms of the crowd, and to subconsciously mirror the calm and orderly behavior you see around you. This phenomenon, known as social proof or collective effervescence, was engineered into the very stones. Ancient architects took this psychological principle even further by infusing these spaces with layers of sacred meaning. The entrances and primary axes of these stadiums were often meticulously aligned with celestial events, like the sunrise on a solstice, or with significant local landmarks, such as a distant mountain peak or a revered temple. This wasn't just for show. It was a deliberate strategy to elevate the space from a mere venue to a consecrated place. When you entered the stadium through a gateway aligned with the rising sun, you weren't just walking into a building, you were participating in a cosmic order. The architecture connected the event to the heavens, to the gods, and to the very identity of the city-state. This created a profound emotional connection and a sense of reverence that acted as the most effective form of crowd control imaginable. People are far less likely to engage in rowdy, disrespectful, or destructive behavior in a place they perceive as sacred or special. The need to show respect for the space itself and for the shared ritual taking place within it overrides the anonymity that can sometimes lead to poor behavior in crowds. There was no need for a heavy-handed authority figure threatening punishment because the environment itself commanded respect. The grandeur of the design, its connection to the divine, and its role as a civic symbol cultivated a collective sense of pride and ownership. People behaved well because they felt honored to be there and felt a responsibility to uphold the dignity of the place. This reveals a timeless truth about human nature. We are far more effectively guided by inspiration and a sense of belonging than we are by coercion and fear. The circle did more than just hold people. It held them together, creating a temporary but powerful community bound by geometry and shared experience. Long before the invention of the clock or the megaphone, ancient architects had a master timekeeper and spotlight freely available in the sky, the sun. Their understanding of solar geometry, the precise path of the sun across the heavens throughout the year, was so advanced that they could literally bake timing, focus, and comfort into the very orientation of their stadiums. This wasn't a vague alignment, it was a form of astronomical engineering. By carefully studying the sun's movements, they could position a structure so that its central axis, its stage, or its main entrance was perfectly aligned with the sunrise on a solstice or an equinox. This celestial connection transformed a mere games event into a moment of cosmic significance, but it also served incredibly practical purposes. The most critical events, whether a gladiator's final salute or a priest's opening invocation, were often scheduled for solar noon, the moment when the sun reached its highest point in the sky. Architects would design the arena so that this blazing midday sun would fall directly upon the central altar or the emperor's podium, creating a natural spotlight that left no doubt where every single person should be looking. This eliminated confusion and focused the collective energy of the crowd onto a single, brilliantly illuminated point, making the spectacle more dramatic and impossible to ignore. But the sun's role was far more nuanced than just a spotlight. It also acted as the world's most reliable clock. As the sun moved across the sky, shadows would creep along the stone seats and track markings. A shadow falling across a specific carved line or symbol might signal the start of the next race or the beginning of an intermission. This use of shadows as natural timers created a rhythm that felt organic and inevitable. There were no jarring electronic buzzers or officials shouting over the crowd. The progression of the event was guided by the silent, majestic movement of the heavens themselves. This synchronization with nature reduced restlessness because the crowd subconsciously accepted these solar cues as impartial and unchangeable. Waiting for a shadow to move felt different than waiting for a tardy official. One felt like a natural part of the event's rhythm, while the other feels like poor organization. This subtle psychological difference was key to maintaining a patient and engaged audience. Perhaps the most direct application of solar geometry was in the management of human comfort. In sun-drenched regions like Greece, a full day of spectating under the harsh Mediterranean sun could lead to heat exhaustion, irritability, and a genuinely unpleasant experience. The architects of the stadium at Delphi provided an elegant solution carved directly into the mountainside. They angled the entire seating section to take full advantage of the topography and the sun's path. The stadium was oriented so that the long side of the U-shaped track ran east to west. This meant that for the crucial afternoon hours, when the sun was at its most intense and the events were reaching their peak, the vast majority of the seating was cast in the cool, protective shadow of the surrounding hills. The spectators remained comfortable, their attention undimmed by physical discomfort. This thoughtful design prevented the fidgeting, the search for shade, and the general agitation that can quickly spread through a hot and miserable crowd. By using the sun's own energy against it, these ancient designers ensured that the crowd's energy was preserved for the spectacle, not wasted on battling the elements. They created an environment that felt inherently right and respectful of the audience's well-being, proving that the most effective crowd management often simply involves thoughtful anticipation of human needs. The manipulation of sound extended far beyond the celebrated acoustics of Greek theaters, becoming a sophisticated tool for crowd management across the ancient world. Architects discovered that by sculpting stone into specific geometric forms, they could literally orchestrate the auditory environment of a stadium, turning chaos into clarity. One of their most powerful techniques was the use of concave surfaces, large, curved walls and ceilings that acted like primitive satellite dishes. In the bustling forum spaces adjacent to Roman stadiums, these curved walls were strategically placed behind speakers' platforms. When an official addressed the crowd, his voice would project outward and strike the concave surface behind him. Instead of scattering randomly, the sound waves would reflect off the curve and be focused back into a directed beam, carrying his words much farther into the crowd than his natural voice could ever reach. This ensured that vital announcements about schedule changes, safety instructions, or imperial proclamations were heard clearly by the majority, not just those crammed at the front. The clarity of communication was paramount. It prevented the spread of rumors and misinformation that so often leads to confusion, anxiety, and ultimately, panic in a dense crowd. Everyone was on the same page because the architecture itself made sure of it. This geometric control of sound wasn't only used for top-down commands, it was also harnessed to shape the emotional atmosphere of an event. The design of Roman hippodromes, the massive venues for chariot races, provides a stunning example. The curved ends of the elongated track and the sweeping interior walls were not just structural, they were acoustic instruments. When the crowd roared in excitement as their favorite team rounded the turn, that collective shout would hit the curved walls and be reflected back, not as a dull echo, but as an amplified, focused wave of sound that washed over the spectators. This created a powerful feedback loop of excitement. The crowd would hear its own enthusiasm magnified and return to them, which in turn would fuel even greater cheers. This built a palpable sense of shared energy and unified passion, making individuals feel part of a massive, exhilarated community. This collective effervescence was a powerful deterrent to dissent or disorder. In such an environment of overwhelming shared joy and focus, the social pressure to conform to the positive mood was immense. Isolated arguments or disruptive behavior would feel glaringly out of place and were often suppressed by the crowd itself, all guided by the amplifying geometry of the space. Yet for all this amplification where it was desired, ancient builders also understood the critical need for acoustic dampening in specific areas. The exit corridors or vomitoria after a major event presented a significant danger, the potential for panic. If these narrow, enclosed spaces echoed with the sounds of shouting, screaming, or even just the amplified clatter of footsteps, it could trigger a false alarm and spark a deadly stampede. To prevent this, architects employed clever sound-absorbing strategies. The walls of these passageways were often lined with textured, porous materials like coarse stucco, or even stacked bundles of reeds behind stone lattices. These materials were chosen because their irregular surfaces broke up sound waves, preventing them from reflecting clearly and creating echoes. Furthermore, the corridors themselves were designed with gentle, irregular curves and angled junctions. This geometric complexity further disrupted the path of sound, scattering noise and preventing it from building into a coherent, frightening roar. The result was a strangely hushed and calm environment during evacuation, even as thousands of people moved through it. This auditory calm was a powerful psychological balm, keeping people moving in an orderly fashion and preventing the kind of sonic triggers that can turn a crowded exit into a tragedy. This masterful balance, amplifying sound to unify and inform, while strategically dampening it to prevent panic, showcased a profound understanding that crowd psychology is as much about what we hear as what we see. Beyond the grand curves and calculated slopes, ancient architects wielded a more intimate tool for crowd psychology, the very texture and color of the materials underfoot and in sight. This was a multisensory approach where the feel of a walking surface or the hue of a seating section communicated directly with the subconscious, guiding behavior without a single spoken word. Imagine the main thoroughfare leading into a massive stadium like the Circus Maximus. Instead of rough, dark cobblestones that absorb the punishing sun and feel harsh to walk on, the path was paved with smooth, light-colored travertine or marble. This choice was deeply intentional. The pale, polished surface acted as a natural reflector, bouncing a significant amount of solar radiation back into the atmosphere and creating a noticeably cooler microclimate for the incoming crowd. Underfoot, the smooth stone felt reassuringly solid and cool, even on a scorching day, encouraging a steady, purposeful stride rather than a frantic, uncomfortable rush. This simple material selection directly combated the primary sources of crowd agitation, physical discomfort, and heat stress, fostering a patient and calm mindset from the very moment people entered the space. The psychological messaging continued with deliberate textural changes. While the main walkways were smooth for easy flow, the edges of balconies, the tops of retaining walls, and the steps leading to sensitive areas were often finished with a distinctly rough, rusticated surface. Your hand or foot would instinctively recognize this change in texture. This rough finish acted as a subtle but powerful tactile warning signal, a physical language that said boundary or edge without the need for a visually obstructive railing or a guard's command. It triggered an innate sense of caution, preventing accidental falls and creating a perceived barrier that people naturally respected. This allowed the architects to maintain clean, uninterrupted sightlines across the stadium, preserving the open, communal feel while still ensuring safety through a clever trick of texture. Perhaps the most sophisticated use of this material psychology was in the application of color. In the Colosseum, the immense seating bowl was not a monotonous sea of gray stone. Archaeological evidence and historical accounts suggest it was a vibrant tapestry of color-coded sections. The prized seats closest to the blood-soaked arena floor, the podium, were often marked with bold, warm pigments like deep red ochre and vibrant yellow. These colors, associated with energy, danger, and excitement, subconsciously heightened the adrenaline and visceral thrill for the senators and elites seated there, amplifying the intensity of the spectacle before them. As the eye traveled upward through the tiers reserved for ordinary citizens and into the highest, cheapest seats, the color palette subtly shifted. These upper sections were more likely to be painted in cooler, more muted tones, dusty blues, soft greens, or simply left as the pale, natural stone. These cooler hues have a psychologically calming effect, helping to moderate the emotional experience for those who were farthest from the action. This color zoning was a masterstroke of passive crowd management. It helped preset the emotional tone for different sections of the audience, using the subconscious influence of color to ensure that the energy of the event was distributed as intended, high intensity at the core, gradually calming toward the periphery. It was a silent, elegant system that ensured 50,000 people could experience the same event in ways that suited their place in society, all guided by the intuitive language of material, texture, and color. Beyond the grand architecture and mathematical precision, ancient builders understood that true crowd comfort required mastering a more fluid element, water. In the scorching heat of a Mediterranean afternoon, with tens of thousands of bodies packed together, thirst and heat were not minor inconveniences. They were primary catalysts for agitation and conflict. The ingenious hydraulic systems they developed were feats of engineering that served dual purposes, addressing both the stark practicalities of public health and the subtle nuances of human psychology. These were not afterthoughts, they were integral components of the geometric design, meticulously woven into the stadium's blueprint to ensure the environment itself maintained a state of calm and cooperation. The Romans, in particular, elevated this to an art form, with their famed aqueducts delivering a constant, reliable flow of fresh water to venues like the Colosseum and Circus Maximus. This water was then distributed through a hidden network of lead pipes and channels, all laid out with precise gradients and angles to control the speed and direction of flow without the need for mechanical pumps. The geometry of these water systems was as calculated as the slope of the seating, ensuring efficiency and reliability that modern engineers still marvel at today. One of the most critical applications was beneath the spectator's feet. A web of shallow, gently sloped channels was carved directly under the tiers of stone benches. These discrete conduits served a vital sanitary function, swiftly carrying away rainwater during a storm and any other waste, preventing the unpleasant and hazardous accumulation of liquids on the walking surfaces. This single innovation prevented countless accidents. A slippery step in a crowded, moving mass of people could easily lead to a fall, a panic, and a tragic crush. By keeping the pathways dry and clean, the architecture eliminated a major source of physical discomfort and potential danger, but the psychological impact was equally significant. The absence of standing water and the associated odors contributed immensely to a sense of public hygiene and civic order. In an era before modern sanitation, this attention to cleanliness would have been profoundly reassuring, making the crowded space feel civilized and safe rather than primitive and threatening. This subconscious feeling of safety is a fundamental prerequisite for a relaxed and pleasant crowd dynamic. The management of water wasn't just about removal, it was also about provision. Strategically throughout the stadium, especially at major intersections of foot traffic and in central plazas, elegant public fountains bubbled continuously. These were not merely decorative, they were essential hydration stations offering cool, fresh drinking water to anyone who needed it. Dehydration in a hot, excited crowd leads to dizziness, headaches, and extreme irritability, all emotions that can quickly escalate into arguments or fights. By providing easy, abundant access to water, the stadium's design preemptively cooled tempers along with parched throats. Some fountains were even designed to create a fine, cooling mist that would settle over the surrounding areas, offering a moment of refreshing relief from the oppressive heat and sun. This thoughtful provision for physical comfort was a direct investment in crowd morale. A comfortable person is a patient person, and a patient crowd is a manageable crowd. The gentle, rhythmic sound of the splashing water in these fountains added another layer of psychological benefit, creating a calming auditory backdrop that helped to mask the more jarring, chaotic noise of the immense gathering. This constant, soothing murmur of flowing water provided a subtle, natural soundscape that reduced the overall stress levels of the audience, making them more receptive and less prone to agitation. Every aspect, from the angle of a spout to the slope of a drain, was a calculated part of a holistic geometric strategy to use water not just as a utility, but as a silent guardian of public order and comfort. This integration of sacred geometry transformed the very purpose of these spaces. They were no longer just venues for entertainment, but became portals to the divine, physical manifestations of a culture's worldview. The Mayan ball courts, like the magnificent Great Ball Court at Chichén Itzá, are perhaps the most profound example of this principle in action. The entire structure was meticulously aligned on an east-west axis, positioned so that on the spring and autumn equinoxes, the setting sun would cast shadows that interacted with the intricate carvings on the walls, particularly the iconic stone rings set high on the parallel walls. This wasn't a coincidence, it was a deliberate astronomical alignment that tied the brutal ritual of the ball game directly to the cosmic cycle of the sun and the mythology of the maize god's death and rebirth. The game itself, often involving a rubber ball representing the sun moving across the court of the underworld, was a reenactment of this sacred story. The outcome was believed to influence crop yields, rainfall, and the very favor of the gods. In such a context, the idea of a spectator causing a disruptive commotion was unthinkable. The geometry of the space, its celestial connection, and the immense spiritual weight of the event fostered a collective reverence that made the crowd self-police. Misbehavior wasn't just a breach of etiquette, it was a blasphemous act that could anger the gods and bring ruin to the entire community. The architecture engineered a mindset of solemn participation, where every cheer and every gasp was part of a collective prayer. This weaving of sacred symbolism into functional design was equally sophisticated in the Roman world, though it served a different cultural purpose. For the Romans, public order and civic unity were paramount, and their architecture reflected this. The vast floor mosaics that adorned the entryways and concourses of their stadiums and baths were not merely decorative. They often featured intricate geometric patterns, perfectly tessellated labyrinths, complex mandalas, and endless knots. These were powerful, ancient symbols found across Indo-European cultures, representing a journey, wholeness, and the interconnectedness of all things within the empire. As thousands of citizens walked across these mosaics, they were unconsciously absorbing these messages of unity and shared Roman identity. The patterns also served a subtle wayfinding function. The flow of the geometric designs could gently guide the movement of people, using visual interest to direct traffic along efficient paths without the need for barriers. This dual purpose, symbolic and practical, encouraged a demeanor of respectful conduct. People moved through a space that was not just built but inscribed with meaning, and they behaved in a manner worthy of that grandeur. The stadium became a temple to civic virtue, and its geometric language was the liturgy. This fusion of the sacred and the structural reveals the highest aspiration of ancient architectural psychology. It wasn't just about preventing chaos, it was about cultivating a specific, elevated state of mind. By embedding cultural and spiritual narratives into the very angles and alignments of a building, the architects gave people a reason beyond themselves to behave with order and respect. The crowd was no longer a mass that needed to be controlled, but a congregation participating in a shared, meaningful experience. The authority did not come from a threat of punishment from gods, but from an internalized sense of awe and belonging inspired by the geometry itself. This profound understanding that the most effective discipline is born from inspiration and shared belief, not from coercion, is perhaps the most powerful lesson these ancient stones have to teach us. This incredible versatility in design shows that ancient architects were true masters of behavioral tailoring, crafting each space with a specific social purpose in mind. They understood that the geometry needed for the thunderous excitement of a chariot race would be entirely unsuitable for the solemn deliberation of a political assembly or the sacred procession of a religious ritual. Their approach was never a one-size-fits-all solution. It was a sophisticated toolkit of shapes and angles, each selected to elicit the precise crowd dynamics required for the event at hand. The elongated oval of a Roman hippodrome, for instance, was a masterstroke of kinetic engineering. Unlike the compact ellipse of the Colosseum, this stretched-out shape with its dramatically tight turns at either end was designed for speed and spectacle. The primary sightline was not focused on a single central point, but rather followed the exhilarating, high-speed loop of the chariots themselves. This continuous, sweeping visual track meant the audience's attention was perpetually engaged, their heads turning in unison to follow the action. There was no reason for their eyes or their bodies to wander, because the geometry of the arena itself created a captivating, unbroken narrative of motion. This constant visual stimulation was key to preventing the distraction and restlessness that can quickly spread through a large crowd during a lull in the action. The architecture ensured the spectacle was always front and center, literally guiding the collective gaze to maintain rapt attention from start to finish. For the completely different atmosphere of a political gathering, such as in the Roman Comitium, the geometric strategy shifted dramatically from spectacle to society. Here, the goal was not passive observation but active participation and clear communication. The concentric circular design of these early assembly spaces was a genius application of egalitarian principles and acoustic science. The circular form inherently lacks a privileged front or a neglected back, symbolizing that every citizen's voice held equal weight. A speaker standing in the central orchestra or in the later rostra was surrounded by ascending tiers of citizens. This meant their voice would project outward in a near 360-degree arc, allowing people gathered on all sides to hear the arguments clearly. This design fostered a sense of inclusive engagement and made it possible for orators to connect with the entire crowd without straining to shout, which would have undermined the gravitas of political discourse. The circular arrangement also had a subtle psychological effect, creating a sense of collective identity and shared purpose. It visually reinforced the idea that everyone was part of the same civic body, gathered around the common hearth of the state, which encouraged more thoughtful listening and civil debate. The geometry itself was cultivating the very democracy it was designed to house. Perhaps the most nuanced application of all was reserved for sacred and ritualistic spaces. For ceremonies that required a sense of solemn procession, mystical symbolism, and a deliberate, measured pace, architects turned to more complex polygonal shapes like hexagons and octagons. These forms, with their multiple straight sides and sharp angles, created a very different experiential quality than the flowing curves of a theater or arena. A hexagon, for example, naturally creates a series of distinct, well-defined stations or alcoves around its perimeter. This allowed for a ritual to unfold in a clear, sequential order, with participants moving from one sacred point to the next in a ceremonial dance that felt both predetermined and profoundly orderly. The angles themselves often held deep symbolic meaning, with the number 6 and 8 frequently representing cosmic order, regeneration, or divine balance in various ancient cultures. Walking a hexagonal or octagonal path was not just a physical journey, it was a spiritual pilgrimage through a geometric metaphor. The structure dictated a slower, more contemplative pace, with each turn marking a new stage in the ritual. This stood in stark contrast to the free-flowing movement of a games venue, proving that the ancient builders could use their geometric language to command reverence and introspection just as effectively as they could incite cheers and excitement. This breathtaking adaptability reveals a depth of understanding that goes far beyond mere construction. It was a profound philosophy of how space shapes the human spirit, whether in pursuit of thrill, governance, or the divine. For centuries after the decline of Rome, the profound geometric wisdom that had once orchestrated the movement of thousands seemed to vanish into the dust of those very ruins. The grand public spectacles of the ancient world gave way to a more fragmented and fortified medieval existence, where large, peaceful gatherings were often a liability rather than a civic goal. The sprawling elliptical arenas and perfectly proportioned theaters were largely forgotten, their stones quarried for castles and cathedrals. Public life retreated into crowded, winding, and often chaotic market squares, spaces that grew organically without a master plan, where crowd control, when necessary, fell to the brute force of royal guards and city watchmen. The subtle, psychological guidance of geometry had been replaced by the overt threat of authority. Yet, like a dormant seed, these ancient principles were merely waiting for the right conditions to sprout once more. That resurgence began in the vibrant city-states of Renaissance Italy, a period of explosive rediscovery where artists and architects, inspired by the humanist revival of classical learning, began to meticulously study the half-buried ruins that dotted the Italian countryside. They weren't just sketching broken columns and crumbling arches, they were reverse engineering a lost science of space. They measured the proportions of ancient theaters, deciphered the geometric ratios in Roman texts by Vitruvius, and began to understand that the awe they felt in these spaces was not an accident, it was a calculable result of mathematical harmony. This wasn't mere imitation, it was a conscious revival of a philosophy that placed human experience and social order at the very center of design. The magnificent Teatro Olimpico in Vicenza, designed by the architect Andrea Palladio in the late 16th century, stands as the purest embodiment of this Renaissance reawakening. Though it appears at first glance like an indoor Roman theater, it represents a breathtaking fusion of recovered ancient wisdom and bold new innovation. Palladio resurrected the classic semicircular cavea, the tiered seating that ensured perfect sight lines for every single patron, allowing the elite audience to see and be seen in a carefully calibrated social performance. But his true genius lay in the stage itself, where he employed a radical use of forced perspective. He built a fixed scenic backdrop with 5 ornate archways, and through each arch stretched a street scene constructed of increasingly small buildings and angled floors that created the illusion of vast urban vistas receding into the far distance. This was geometry used not just for crowd management, but for psychological immersion, manipulating perception to transport the entire audience into the world of the play. The acoustics, born from the precise curvature of the seating, were so perfect that a whisper on the stage could be heard in the very last row, proving that the ancient understanding of sound amplification through shape had been fully recovered and perfected. This geometric renaissance was not confined to the rarefied air of private theaters. It spilled out into the very heart of public life. Town planners, inspired by the ideal of the perfect city, began to redesign public squares or piers using the ancient principles of symmetry and focal points. The elliptical form, so beloved by the Romans, made a triumphant return. A perfect example is the Piazza del Campo in Siena. While its construction began earlier, its iconic shell-shaped, semi-elliptical design was embraced during the Renaissance as the ideal model for communal gathering. The gentle, fan-like slope of the piazza naturally draws people inward toward the focal point of the Palazzo Pubblico, creating a vast, open-air auditorium. This subtle incline provides a clear view for everyone during the famed Palio horse race, while the encompassing curve makes the immense crowd feel like a unified community rather than a disordered mob. It was a clear demonstration that the same geometric principles that calmed Romans watching gladiators could also organize citizens watching a civic celebration, proving the timelessness of the design. This era did more than just copy the past. It built upon it, blending recovered ancient wisdom with thrilling new mathematical insights from thinkers like Leonardo da Vinci and Leon Battista Alberti, who themselves studied the human body's proportions to inform their designs. The Renaissance gave the world a powerful, renewed conviction that a well-designed space could civilize behavior, foster peaceful assembly, and elevate the human spirit, all without a single soldier needing to raise a voice. It laid the indispensable groundwork for everything that was to come, providing the blueprint for the modern stadium and a lasting testament to the idea that the most effective and most humane form of crowd control is not force but form. This ancient wisdom, once lost and then rediscovered, now forms the very backbone of our modern public spaces, proving that these geometric principles are not historical curiosities but enduring truths about human behavior. Walk into any major sports arena today, and you are stepping into a direct descendant of the Colosseum's elliptical genius. The Beijing National Stadium, affectionately known as the Bird's Nest, is a stunning case study. While its exterior is a marvel of modern expressionist architecture, its interior layout is a masterclass in classical crowd psychology. The playing field is a perfect ellipse, and the seating bowl rises around it in a carefully calculated gradient that ensures every one of its 91,000 seats has an unobstructed view of the action. But the real magic happens in the concourses. The architects designed a continuous, unbroken circular walkway on every level, a direct echo of the Colosseum's ambulatories. This ringed pathway prevents the dangerous dead ends and traffic jams common in older stadiums with straight corridors, allowing people and concessions to flow in a constant, smooth loop. The Vomitoria, now called ingress and egress tunnels, are wider and more gently angled than ever, using the same converging wall principle to effortlessly channel tens of thousands of people in and out without the need for frantic direction from security. The geometry does the heavy lifting, creating a sense of easy, intuitive movement that keeps fans calm and focused on the game, not on the struggle of navigating the building. The same principles are harnessed to master the invisible element of sound in today's premier concert halls. Architects and acoustic engineers now use incredibly sophisticated computer modeling, but the foundational goal is identical to that of the builders of Epidorus: to make every whisper from the stage reach every ear in the house with perfect clarity. They achieve this by designing the interior surfaces, the walls, the ceilings, the balconies, with specific complex curves derived from ancient Greek formulas for reverberation time. These surfaces are sculpted to catch sound waves from the performers and reflect them out into the audience in a precise, timed sequence. This ensures that music retains its richness and warmth without becoming a muddy echo. The result is a deeply immersive experience where the audience is effortlessly held in a sonic embrace. There's no need to strain to hear, no distracting coughs from nearby seats amplified by poor acoustics. The geometry of the hall itself creates a bubble of focused attention, keeping everyone collectively lost in the performance. This auditory control is a powerful form of crowd management, as a comfortable, engaged listener is a quiet and respectful one. Perhaps the most widespread application of this ancient knowledge is in the spaces we navigate under stress, airports and theme parks. Disney Imagineers are perhaps the modern world's greatest practitioners of architectural psychology, using every trick in the ancient book to manage millions of visitors. You'll never find a long, straight queue line at a major Disney attraction. Instead, waiting areas are a series of switchbacks and gently curving corridors. This design isn't just about packing more people into a smaller footprint. It's a brilliant psychological tool. The curves break the line into visually discrete segments, so you can't see the intimidatingly long queue ahead, only the next short switchback. This creates a constant sense of progress and movement, dramatically reducing the perceived wait time and the impatience and frustration that come with it. They also create weenies, a term Walt Disney himself used for visual focal points like Cinderella's castle at the end of Main Street, USA. This borrowed vista acts exactly like the central altar in an ancient stadium, drawing the crowd forward naturally and dispersing them evenly throughout the park without the need for maps or directions. Airports have adopted these lessons to combat traveler anxiety. Modern terminals like Singapore's Changi Airport feature vast, soaring ceilings with curved, undulating forms that evoke a sense of openness and calm, directly countering the claustrophobic feel of older, low-ceilinged terminals. The pathways between gates are rarely straight. They curve gently, slowing foot traffic just enough to prevent collisions and reducing the visual clutter that can overwhelm a stressed traveler. Strategic focal points, such as stunning art installations or serene indoor gardens, are placed at major decision points like security exits or corridor junctions. These features act as subconscious gathering points, providing a moment of orientation and calm that prevents the aimless wandering and congestion that can quickly lead to frustration. In every one of these modern spaces, from the roar of a stadium to the hushed awe of a concert hall to the controlled chaos of a theme park, the silent, guiding hand of ancient geometry is still at work, proving that the most effective way to manage a crowd is not to command it, but to design for it. This incredible power of design to shape our behavior so effortlessly brings us to a crucial and deeply relevant question for our modern world. Where do we draw the line between helpful guidance and subtle manipulation? The ancient architects of Rome and Greece wielded their geometric tools with a clear communal purpose: to foster harmony, safety, and a shared experience for the collective good. Their goal was to replace the club and the spear with the curve and the slope, creating order through empathy rather than through fear. But in today's world, the same principles can be, and often are, applied with very different intentions. Walk through any major international airport, and you'll find yourself on a carefully calculated journey. The winding path you take from security to your gate isn't just designed to prevent traffic jams. It's also meticulously engineered to lead you past a gauntlet of luxury duty-free shops and enticing restaurants. The gentle curves slow your pace just enough to make you glance at window displays, and the lighting and floor materials might subtly change to signal a retail zone, all funneling you toward commercial opportunities you didn't necessarily seek out. This isn't necessarily evil, but it is a form of choice architecture where the environment is designed to influence your spending behavior, often without your conscious awareness. The same geometric principles that once guided citizens to a sacred ritual are now used to guide consumers to a point of sale. This moves us into a critical ethical discussion about autonomy and consent. When an ancient spectator entered the Colosseum, the design helped them find their seat and see the games clearly. It served their stated desire to be a spectator. The design was in service to their own goal. But what happens when design is used to create a desire or to lead someone toward a choice they wouldn't have made on their own? Consider the layout of a modern casino, a masterclass in potentially exploitative geometric psychology. There are no clocks and few windows, using enclosure to distort your sense of time. The maze-like arrangement of slot machines is designed to make it difficult to find an exit, encouraging you to stay and play longer. The games themselves are placed along curved pathways that ensure you're constantly exposed to new stimuli. This isn't guidance, it's a form of architectural persuasion that can prey on human vulnerability. The ethical breach occurs when the design no longer serves the individual's best interest, but instead serves a purely commercial or controlling agenda at the individual's expense. So how do we, as a society, navigate this? The key lies in intentionality and transparency. The goal should be to use these powerful geometric tools for empowerment, not entrapment. Ethical design respects individual agency. It creates intuitive, comfortable, and safe environments, while also providing clear choices and visible exits, both literal and metaphorical. It allows people to easily opt out of the designed flow if they wish. A public park might use a gently curving path to suggest a pleasant walking route, but it also leaves the grassy field open for you to forge your own trail. That is the balance: design that suggests and facilitates rather than design that dictates and corrals. It's about creating a framework for human experience that reduces friction and enhances freedom, rather than one that substitutes a designer's will for the individual's own. This ethical framework honors the original spirit of those ancient stadiums, which sought not to control the crowd, but to liberate it from the chaos that would otherwise diminish its collective joy and shared purpose. The true legacy of this ancient wisdom is a call to build a world where our environments serve us, respect us, and empower us to be our best selves together. Once you understand the language of ancient geometric design, you start seeing its fluent translation everywhere in our modern world, speaking silently to our subconscious in the same way it did 2,000 years ago. That sense of calm you feel walking into the grand rotunda of a major museum like the one in Washington, D.C., is not an accident. The vast circular space acts as a central hub, its shape inherently preventing the claustrophobic gridlock of right-angled hallways. From this central point, galleries radiate outward like spokes on a wheel, offering clear, intuitive choices that naturally disperse the crowd in multiple directions. This geometric layout eliminates the frustrating dead ends and backtracking that cause visitor congestion and irritation, allowing everyone to flow smoothly from exhibit to exhibit without ever feeling trapped or disoriented. The circle creates a natural organizational system, making a potentially overwhelming space feel manageable and inviting. This same principle of curving lines to soothe impatience is masterfully applied in the most stressful of modern environments, the airport security line. The serpentine switchback queue defined by those familiar retractable belt barriers is a direct application of ancient wisdom. A long, straight line would reveal the daunting number of people ahead of you, triggering anxiety and frustration. But the gentle, repeating curves break the weight into discrete, manageable segments. You can only see the next small section of the line, creating a constant sense of movement and progress as you round each bend. This visual trickery, a geometric sleight of hand, dramatically reduces the perceived wait time and keeps tempers from flaring. It's a brilliant, non-confrontational way to manage a crowd that would otherwise be tired, rushed, and irritable, proving that a simple curve can be more effective than a dozen security personnel shouting orders. Even the places we learn have been transformed by this ancient understanding. Walk into a modern university lecture hall or a corporate training room, and you'll likely find amphitheater-style seating. This is the direct descendant of the tiered cavea of Greek and Roman theaters. The graduated rise of the seats ensures that every student has an unobstructed view of the professor, fostering a sense of inclusion and engagement that is impossible in a flat classroom where those in the back are staring at the backs of heads. This design doesn't just improve visibility, it alters the social dynamic. The elevated rows create a collective focus downward toward the instructor, minimizing distractions and encouraging participation. The very shape of the room tells everyone that they are there to see and be involved in a shared experience, breaking down the barriers to communication that hinder learning. It's architecture that actively facilitates collaboration and focus. This newfound awareness does more than just make you a more observant person. It empowers you to become a more intentional designer of your own environment. You can apply these principles to something as simple as hosting a party. Instead of arranging all your furniture against the walls in a large, empty rectangle, a layout that often leads to awkward, fragmented conversations, you might create smaller, circular seating groupings. This mimics the focal point of an ancient arena, naturally drawing people into more intimate and engaging discussions. Even organizing your kitchen for efficiency uses these ideas. Placing the refrigerator, stove, and sink in a gentle triangular workflow is about creating a path of least resistance, a personal vomitoria for your daily meal preparation. When you start to see the world through this geometric lens, You transition from being a passive passenger in your environment to an active pilot, capable of arranging your surroundings to reduce friction, enhance harmony, and guide behavior in positive, productive ways. It's time to clear away centuries of misconceptions and Hollywood dramatizations to reveal the true genius behind these ancient structures. One of the most persistent and oddly enduring myths is the belief that the Roman vomitoria were rooms where overindulgent spectators would go to vomit so they could return to their feasting. This grisly image, while memorable, is completely false. The term vomitorium actually comes from the Latin verb voma, meaning to spew forth, and it refers to the ingenious arched passageways that allowed the massive crowd to be spewed out of the stadium with incredible speed and efficiency. These were not rooms of illness but masterpieces of circulation engineering, designed with precisely angled walls to accelerate human flow and prevent the dangerous bottlenecks that could turn a peaceful exit into a deadly crush. This misunderstanding diminishes their brilliant functionality, reducing a key architectural innovation to a cartoonish footnote about Roman excess. Another widespread assumption is that ancient crowds were inherently, uncontrollably violent mobs, requiring the constant threat of armed guards to maintain order. While historical accounts certainly describe riots and unrest, the geometric design of the stadiums themselves was the first and most effective line of defense against such chaos. The very purpose of the elliptical shape, the tiered seating, the strategic entry and exit points, and the calming water features was to preemptively eliminate the primary triggers of crowd violence: obstructed views, physical discomfort, confusion, heat exhaustion, and the feeling of being trapped. By engineering an environment that felt fair, comfortable, and intuitively easy to navigate, the architects removed the frustrations that lead to shoving, arguments, and panic. A spectator who can see perfectly, find their seat easily, stay cool and hydrated, and leave without a struggle is a spectator far less likely to become aggressive. The stone itself acted as a silent peacekeeper, fostering a cooperative atmosphere where the sheer scale of the event could be enjoyed as a shared civic experience rather than endured as a stressful ordeal. Perhaps the most significant myth to debunk is the idea that these designs were happy accidents or the result of simple trial and error. This assumption robs ancient engineers of their rightful credit as meticulous scientists and observers of human nature. The precise application of the golden ratio in facade design, the complex geometric calculations for sightline angles, and the astronomical alignments of entrances were not guesses. They were the products of rigorous observation, iteration, and a deep, formalized understanding of mathematics and physics that was passed down through generations of builders. Structures like the theater of Epidorus, with its perfect acoustics, required an advanced comprehension of sound wave reflection that could only have been achieved through deliberate experimentation and measurement. The consistent replication of these principles across vast empires and centuries proves this was a sophisticated and intentional science, a collected body of knowledge dedicated to solving the complex problem of human coexistence in dense spaces. Recognizing this intentionality allows us to truly appreciate their work not as primitive monuments, but as some of the most psychologically intelligent structures ever built. We are now standing at the precipice of a new architectural revolution, one that takes the timeless principles of ancient geometry and supercharges them with the predictive power of artificial intelligence. This is not about replacing the wisdom of the ellipse or the semicircle, but about making these forms dynamic, responsive, and alive. Imagine a stadium of the future, perhaps one built for the Olympics of 2040. Its fundamental shape still honors the Colosseum's elliptical genius, but now its very structure can breathe and adapt. Using a network of thousands of embedded sensors and cameras, An AI system continuously monitors the crowd's density, movement patterns, and even its emotional temperature through real-time analysis of noise levels and movement fluidity. This live data feeds into powerful simulation models that can predict a bottleneck 30 seconds before it even begins to form. In this intelligent environment, the architecture itself can respond. Sections of seating could feature adjustable slopes, with rows subtly tilting to improve sight lines for a specific event or to create a more intimate configuration for a concert. Walkways and vomitoria might employ dynamic guiding systems where embedded LED pathways on the floor light up in real time, creating optimal, flowing routes to exits or concessions based on the current crowd distribution, effortlessly dissolving potential crushes before they start. Even the acoustics could become a living system. Building on the static reflectivity of ancient Greek theaters, a network of adjustable panels on the ceiling could modulate their angle and porosity in real time, tuned by AI to enhance the clarity of a public address during an emergency or to amplify the roar of the crowd during a pivotal game moment, using geometry to master sound with a precision the ancients could only dream of. This fusion of AI and geometry extends into sustainability, using ancient forms to solve modern problems. Imagine a stadium roof designed as a massive, complex hyperbolic paraboloid, a shape known for its strength and ability to efficiently channel water. This roof could be constructed from a new generation of transparent solar glass tiles, generating power while sheltering spectators. The rainwater it collects would be channeled through geometrically optimized aqueducts, mimicking the Romans, to feed internal systems that create cooling mists during heat waves, all managed by an AI that anticipates weather changes. Furthermore, virtual and augmented reality will allow us to test these designs with impossible speed. Architects will be able to don VR headsets and step into a full-scale digital twin of a proposed stadium, experiencing the sightlines and flow as a virtual crowd of 100,000 avatars moves through it, letting them refine the geometry based on simulated human behavior long before the first stone is laid. This ongoing dialogue between form and function, now supercharged by data and prediction, promises to create gathering spaces that are not only intuitively safe but also profoundly responsive to our collective human experience. These monumental structures stand as a powerful testament to a profound and often overlooked truth about societal success. That enduring order is built not on the threat of punishment, but on the promise of inclusion. The ancient stadium was far more than a venue for games. It was a physical manifesto of a social contract, a bold declaration that a society thrives by elevating the collective experience of its citizens. Every calculated slope ensuring a clear view, every curved pathway preventing a crush, and every fountain offering respite was a statement of respect for fundamental human needs. The architects understood that a person who is physically comfortable, who feels they have been treated fairly with a good seat and an easy journey, and who is connected to the event and those around them, is a person naturally inclined toward cooperation and civility. This philosophy stands in stark contrast to a punitive model of control, which operates on the fear of what will happen if you misbehave. The geometric approach instead creates an environment where the desire to misbehave never arises in the first place, because the core frustrations that lead to conflict have been designed out of the experience. It is a proactive investment in public goodwill that pays dividends in collective harmony. In this way, the packed stands of the Colosseum or the theater of Epidorus became a remarkable microcosm of an ideal community. Within the embrace of those stone curves, social hierarchies were both acknowledged and harmonized. The wealthy sat closer, the common citizens higher up, yet the geometry guaranteed that every single person, regardless of status, was granted the same fundamental dignities of vision, acoustics, and safety. This wasn't a forced equality of outcome, but a carefully engineered equity of experience. The design sent an unmistakable message: everyone here has a valued place, and everyone will share in the spectacle. This fostered a powerful, albeit temporary, sense of shared identity and common purpose. For the duration of the event, the crowd was transformed from a collection of disparate individuals and competing classes into a single, cohesive audience, united by the shared joy and awe that the architecture itself made possible. The stadium became a crucible for civic unity, demonstrating that a society can celebrate its structure while simultaneously transcending its divisions through a carefully crafted shared experience. The resonance of this ancient wisdom is perhaps more urgent today than ever before. In our modern world, which often feels increasingly fragmented by polarized debates and digital isolation, the lesson of the stadium is a beacon of hope. It reminds us that our physical environments are not neutral backdrops but active participants in shaping our interactions. We have a choice in how we build our world. We can design spaces that alienate, separate, and control through barriers and surveillance, or we can choose to build like the ancients, using design to connect, include, and empower. This applies far beyond architecture to the very structure of our institutions, our digital town squares, and our community planning. The core principle is about bridging differences not through enforced agreement, but through creating frameworks for shared, positive experience. It is about finding ways to make people feel heard, seen, and comfortable, thereby unlocking their innate capacity for cooperation. This is the powerful, enduring legacy left to us by those ancient builders, a call to action for modern leaders, architects, and planners to wield their power with empathy, to build bridges of stone and policy that foster a lasting and voluntary harmony, proving once again that the most sophisticated technology for managing human society is not a weapon or a law, but a thoughtfully drawn curve. When we consider the sheer ingenuity of these ancient designs, it's not just modern observers who are left in awe. Today's leading experts in architecture and history see them as monumental achievements that were centuries ahead of their time. Elizabeth Diller, a founding partner of the renowned firm Diller Scofidio plus Renfro, whose work often explores the intersection of space and behavior, has pointed out that these structures were pioneers of concepts we now formalize. She observes that ancient stadiums prefigured modern behavioral science by centuries, recognizing that their builders possessed an intuitive yet profound grasp of how environment dictates action. This wasn't just building, it was a form of social scripting in stone, a way of coding peaceful coexistence into the very ground people walked on. This perspective shifts our understanding from viewing these arenas as simple backdrops to recognizing them as active, psychological instruments that choreographed human movement and emotion long before we had the vocabulary to describe such phenomena. Echoing this sentiment from the historian's vantage point, the esteemed Cambridge professor Mary Beard, whose work has extensively decoded Roman life, offers a powerful and concise summary of their operational genius. She emphasizes that Roman crowds were managed by stone, not soldiers, a statement that cuts to the heart of their sophisticated approach to social order. This wasn't about the absence of authority, but rather about the distribution of it. The authority was embedded into the architecture itself, into the curve of a ramp and the angle of a step, making compliance feel like a natural choice rather than an enforced command. Professor Beard's insight reveals the subtle power dynamics at play. By removing the need for constant, visible policing, these designs reduced friction and the potential for confrontational encounters between the public and those in power, fostering a more organic and willingly accepted form of organization. These expert validations are crucial because they elevate the discussion beyond mere historical curiosity. They underscore that this geometric crowd control wasn't just a clever trick or a happy accident. It was a revolutionary fusion of disciplines. It represented a seamless blending of art and science, where the sculptor's eye for form met the mathematician's command of precision to solve profound social challenges. The artists understood the human spirit, the need for spectacle, belonging, and awe. The scientists and engineers understood the physics of bodies in motion, the properties of sound waves, and the structural integrity of materials. Together, they created environments that were not only physically sound but psychologically sound, addressing the core human needs for safety, fairness, and connection. This interdisciplinary approach is the very model that modern designers and urban planners strive for today, proving that the most enduring solutions are those that speak to both our logic and our emotions. The enduring relevance of these principles is what makes this ancient wisdom so vital for our contemporary world. These insights inspire us to look beyond brute force and technological surveillance as our primary tools for managing public life, urging instead a return to thoughtful, empathetic design. It challenges today's architects and city officials to ask not how we can monitor people more closely, but how we can design spaces that make people feel so inherently comfortable, oriented, and respected that the desire to act disruptively never arises. This is a call to apply these principles thoughtfully, to build a modern world that learns from the past to create a more harmonious and intuitive future, where our environments continue to serve as silent, steadfast guardians of public well-being. The hidden geometry of ancient stadiums offers us a powerful and timeless lesson, one that resonates far beyond the world of architecture. It teaches us that the most effective and humane way to manage crowds is not through intimidation or force, but through intelligence and empathy, through designs that work in harmony with our deepest human instincts. For centuries, we have marveled at the grandeur of these structures, but their true genius lies not in their scale, but in their subtlety. The perfect ellipse of the Colosseum wasn't just for show. It was a masterful tool that streamlined the movement of 50,000 people, making chaos feel like a coordinated dance. The acoustic curves of Greek theaters did more than carry sound. They united strangers into a single, captivated audience, bound together by a shared experience. These ancient builders understood something we are still relearning today, that our environment doesn't just host our behavior, it actively shapes it, guiding our emotions and actions in ways we often don't even perceive. This profound wisdom is a gift from the past, a blueprint for how we might build a more harmonious future. As we look ahead to designing the next generation of spaces, from smart cities and virtual reality platforms to community centers and public parks, we have a choice to make. We can rely on ever more pervasive surveillance and restrictive barriers, or we can choose the path of intelligent design. We can choose to create environments that foster natural cooperation, that encourage joy and respect through their very form. Imagine concert halls that use dynamic acoustics to make every seat the best seat, or public squares whose layouts naturally dissolve political tension and encourage civil discourse. The principles are all there, waiting in the stones of antiquity, ready to be fused with the technology of tomorrow. This is the call to action for today's architects, urban planners, and community leaders, to carry this ancient wisdom forward, to build worlds where the geometry itself is a silent guardian of our collective well-being. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey into the hidden patterns of history. If you've enjoyed unraveling these architectural mysteries with me, please consider subscribing to the channel for more explorations into the forgotten wisdom of the past. I would truly love to hear your thoughts on all of this down in the comments below. What was the most surprising insight for you? Where have you noticed these principles at work in your own life? Let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, keep looking closer at the world around you. You never know what secrets you might find hidden in plain sight.